Lucas Grant had no plans to make enemies. After 15 years on the road as a blues guitarist, he'd traded tour buses for peace and moved into a quiet home on Juniper Ridge Lane. He liked it here, clean sidewalks, slow evenings, and room for the only thing that still made his heart race. Guitars, not just any guitars. Lucas had spent 2 decades collecting rare, vintage, and custom-built masterpieces. His home studio, a fireproof climate-controlled room, held over 30 of them. Together, they were worth more than the house itself, but not everyone appreciated fine craftsmanship. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, lived across the street in a beige colonial with a flagpole and binoculars. She noticed everything, and lately, she'd decided Lucas was a disruption. The letters started soft. Dear Mr. Grant, it's been brought to our attention that musical equipment may be stored improperly. Lucas ignored them at first. His studio was permitted. He had blueprints, permits, zoning approval. But Karen didn't deal in facts, she dealt in control. When the letters didn't work, the visits began. First a knock, then a demand to inspect, then threats of fines and fire code violations. Lucas stood his ground, always calm, always polite, but that only seemed to fuel her persistence. 1 week later, Lucas returned from a weekend trip to find his side gate open. The lock had been snapped. He checked the house. Nothing stolen but his guitar room. The scent hit first, acrid, sharp, then the sight. Blackened cases, melted strings, ashes where rosewood used to be, his 59 Les Paul, gone. A custom gong, his father's worn acoustic, the one he'd written his first song on. Gong, the fire marshal's report was chilling. Accelerants used, no electrical fault. Deliberate ignition suspected. Lucas didn't cry, he didn't yell. He sat quietly in the ashes for an hour. Then he opened a locked drawer in his office. Inside were backups, emails, HOA board call recordings, and a new set of security cam footage, including one from a hidden lens inside the fence post. The footage was grainy, but it was enough. Karen, late at night, entering the backyard, holding something in her hand. Lucas copied the footage to 3 drives. He didn't call her, he called someone else. The next morning, Karen stood at her mailbox like nothing had happened. She glanced over as Lucas loaded a cardboard box into the back of his truck. You should have listened to my warnings, she said without looking up. Lucas didn't respond. He drove down the street, turned left, and headed straight for the county sheriff's office. Lucas didn't drive angry. He drove focused. The box in his back seat didn't hold ashes or broken strings. It held truth. 3 flash drives, 1 binder of HOA records, and 2 fire marshal reports. 1 preliminary, 1 confirmed. Lucas had filed the insurance claim already, but this wasn't about money anymore. This was personal. This was about someone walking onto his land, crossing every line, and lighting fire to the one thing he couldn't replace. He pulled into the county sheriff's office and stepped inside. A deputy at the front desk raised an eyebrow as Lucas placed the box on the counter. You need to speak with someone, the deputy asked. I'd like to file a report for felony arson, Lucas said, voice calm. And I've got a suspect, surveillance footage, and motive. The deputy stood straighter. Name, Lucas Grant. The suspect's name is Karen Whitmore, HOA board president. The room shifted. Sheriff Dayton Duke McCall was a man of details. Former Marine, played upright bass in the church jazz band. When Lucas explained the whole story, from Karen's threats to the bogus violations to the burned collection, McCall didn't interrupt. He just nodded, then plugged in the flash drive. The footage spoke louder than Lucas ever could. A figure, after midnight, slipping through a gate, a faint glint of metal in her hand, a sudden flash inside the room, then retreat. The sheriff leaned back, silent for a long time. You know, he said finally, I once had a 62 Fender Jazzmaster, gave it to my nephew when I enlisted. I get it. Lucas said nothing. Let's start with this, the sheriff continued. We'll process the footage, pull her HOA records, but if she's touched other properties too, we might be looking at more than just your case. Lucas blinked. You think she's done this before? I think folks like her don't start with fire, they escalate. Meanwhile, back on Juniper Ridge Lane, Karen was having a garden party. Cookies on a tray, lemonade in glass pitchers, folding chairs. The kind of suburban diplomacy that came after storming a neighbor's boundaries. Lucas drove slowly past. She waved at him like nothing had happened, but the smirk faded when she saw Deputy Haskins, the next morning county fire unit, step in onto her porch with a file in hand. Lucas watched from behind his front window. Not smug, not triumphant, just steady. The door opened. Karen stepped out in yoga pants and a headband, mug in hand. The moment Haskins introduced himself, she froze. He didn't stay long, just enough to serve notice of a formal investigation and request a formal statement within 48 hours. Karen didn't wave at anyone that day. That evening, Lucas received an email from someone he hadn't heard from in a while. Marcy Romero, former HOA board secretary. She'd moved away 6 months ago after what she called a hostile board takeover. She'd heard the news. She wanted to talk. They met at a cafe on the edge of town. Marcy came prepared. A manila envelope full of minutes, financial reports, and an unsigned whistleblower letter she'd kept as insurance. The letter described something strange: HOA. Budget transfers for emergency compliance inspections and safety enforcement bonuses. One of the signatures, Karen's another twist. Karen had authorized entry into Lucas's property months ago, citing structural instability without informing him. Lucas flipped the pages, heart steady but burning. This wasn't just harassment anymore. Karen had built an entire HOA slush fund to justify personal grudges, and he'd just found the thread to unravel the whole thing. But the next day, something happened Lucas didn't expect. He came home from the sheriff's office to find his side window broken. Nothing stolen, just his kitchen drawer left open and on the counter. One guitar pick melted around the edges. It was one of his father's, the one Karen shouldn't have had access to. Lucas stared at the melted guitar pick lying on his kitchen counter. It was unmistakable. His father's initials, scratched by hand into the plastic back when he was just 17, were still visible, even beneath the warping. This one hadn't been on display. It had been locked in a velvet-lined case, tucked inside his father's old hollow-body Gretsch. The Gretsch was gone, torched with the others, but the pick that should have gone with it. Bucklix didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. Whoever left it had broken in, rifled through drawers, and left this one single item, as if to say, we can still get in, and we're not finished. He didn't call the sheriff this time, not yet. Instead, he checked the hidden cameras again. Front yard, garage, backyard, all angles clear, but the footage from the side window, the one broken, was dark, disconnected. Someone had disabled it, and that's when it hit him. It wasn't Karen working alone. The next morning, Lucas drove to the HOA headquarters, a small office attached to a shared clubhouse 5 blocks away. The board was holding an emergency meeting, supposedly to discuss neighborhood security concerns. That's what the email said. Lucas wasn't invited. He showed up anyway. Inside, the usual suspects sat in a semicircle, Karen at the head, her lapdog Vice President Tony Morrow to her right, and 2 board members Lucas barely recognized, Harriet and Glenn. Karen's smile was stiff. Lucas, this is a closed session. He didn't raise his voice. I'm aware. But since this is about security and my house was just broken into, I thought I'd listen in. Karen opened her mouth to object, but Sheriff McCall had walked in behind Lucas. He nodded at the board calmly. I'm here in official capacity. Proceed. Karen sat down. Lucas remained standing. McCall placed a file on the table and opened it slowly. This is a warrant to access all HOA board emails, financial disbursements, and internal communications over the last 12 months. We have strong reason to believe that HOA resources have been misused and property rights have been violated. Karen laughed, a short, dry sound. This is ridiculous. McCall didn't blink. Not to me, not to the county, and certainly not to a grand jury. Tony shifted in his seat. Harriet looked at Karen, then at the sheriff. Glenn quietly stood up and excused himself. No one stopped him. After the meeting broke up, McCall pulled Lucas aside. We'll sort through the paper trail. The budget logs will tell the rest of the story. If there's any equipment purchased by the HOA that could have cut your window feed, we'll find it. Lucas nodded, but his mind was somewhere else. He still didn't know who had left the pick. Karen might have ordered the burn, but someone had gone back into his house after the fact. Someone who knew what was important to him that night. Lucas sat in his backyard, guitarist, his fingers tapping silent chords on his knee. That's when he saw the light flicker in Karen's upstairs window. Not a lamp, a flash. Then, movement. At her side gate, he turned on his side floodlight. Nothing but the bushes rustled. Near the edge of his fence line, he stood slowly, grabbed his phone, and called the sheriff. Before he could speak, someone whispered from the dark. I tried to stop her. You don't understand, this goes deeper than Karen. Lucas froze. A figure emerged. A young woman, early 30s, trembling, clutching a folder. I was her assistant, she said. My name's Dana. I used to clean her house. Then, she made me join the HOA. Lucas opened the gate and let her in cautiously. She handed him the folder. Inside were screenshots, passwords, notes, and one line stood out. Make sure the cameras are dead before Tony goes in. The pic stays. Lucas's pulse stopped. Tony. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his kitchen, staring at the manila folder Dana had handed him. The one with the screenshots, names, and access logs. It confirmed what he feared. Tony Morrow, HOA vice president, had entered Lucas's property 3 times, twice without notice, once at night. The logs showed override codes being used on neighborhood security gates, and Karen, she'd authorized those override permissions herself. But the twist. Lucas's own name appeared under a list labeled surveillance flag, non-compliant residents. The date next to it was from 4 months ago. They'd been watching him long before the fire. Dana sat across the table, hands trembling around a cup of tea. She started it during COVID, she said quietly. Said the HOA needed more control. Said the sheriff's office was too slow to respond. So she installed side cams, then drones, then started flagging people. Flagging for what? Lucas asked. For anything. Wind chimes. Tinted windows, parking angle. You parked your truck facing out instead of in once. She flipped. Lucas exhaled, long and slow. And the fire. Dana looked down. I told her it was too far. But, Tony wanted it done, said it'd push you out, said he'd make it look like a wiring issue. Lucas leaned back in his chair, heart cold now. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Why are you here, Dana? Because I saw what was in that room. You didn't just lose wood and strings. You lost memories. I saw your father's photo next to that guitar. She doesn't deserve to get away with it. The next morning, Lucas met with Sheriff McCall again. He slid the folder across the desk without a word. McCall opened it, read, and let out a low whistle. Well, this just went from a fire case to a federal one. Lucas raised a brow. Federal. Unauthorized surveillance on private citizens. Digital eavesdropping. Property violations. If this stuff checks out, and it will, we're not talking HOA fines anymore. We're talking indictments. McCall stood and pulled out his phone. I'm calling a federal liaison, but we need one more piece. Something to confirm Karen. And Tony discussed the fire. Lucas opened his backpack. I've got that too. He placed a USB on the desk. Karen had a habit of using voice memos for HOA notes. She left one on a shared drive that hadn't been wiped yet. Dana found it. McCall plugged it in. The audio crackled and played. If he thinks those guitars make him special, wait until there's smoke. Tony, I want you in and out before sunrise. Make it clean. McCall didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, he picked up the phone again. That afternoon, Karen held a surprise HOA community update. On the clubhouse lawn, balloons, coffee, flyers promising beautification incentives, and HOA unity. Tony stood nearby, nodding, doing his best politician smile. But just as Karen took the microphone, 3 unmarked vehicles pulled into the coal-d-sac. McCall, and 2 federal agents stepped out. The smile dropped from Karen's face. Tony tried to walk. They stopped him 5 steps in. Lucas stood across the street, watching quietly. He didn't cheer. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded once. But the twist. 2 hours later, Lucas returned home to find his front door ajar. Inside, nothing was missing. Except the folder. Gone. And Dana. Nowhere to be found. Lucas walked room to room, scanning each drawer, closet, and shelf. Nothing was taken. Not the wallet on his counter, not the tablet beside his bed, not even the keys by the door. But the manila folder Dana had handed over was gone. And Dana? Her number rang twice before it cut to voicemail. Her apartment down in Sycamore Heights didn't answer either. He tried once more, slower this time, but the silence that followed told him everything. She had disappeared, and someone had made sure he'd never see that folder again. Sheriff McCall sat across from Lucas later that evening, hands steepled, brows furrowed. You're sure it was still here when you left this morning? Lucas nodded. It was under the drawer, inside my desk. I didn't say a word about it publicly. McCall exhaled through his nose. Karen and Tony didn't talk. They're not dumb. But Dana, she was a soft target. You think she was threatened. I think someone pulled her out of reach. The question is whether it was for her protection, or to shut her up. Lucas leaned back, fists clenched on his thighs. She risked herself bringing that to me, and that's what makes me nervous. McCall replied, if she's gone silent, it wasn't her idea. The sheriff stood. I'm placing a unit outside your home, 24-hour watch. If they're coming after files, next they might come after you. Lucas didn't argue, but his mind was already moving. If they had Dana, they might have someone else too. The next day, Lucas returned to the HOA records office alone. A small storage room in the clubhouse basement held physical backups, stuff the board never digitized. While others had stayed away after the arrests, Lucas still had board access from a landscaping committee he'd joined long ago. Just to keep an eye on Karen's antics, he keyed into the basement, the air thick and dusty. Most of the files were unremarkable budget line items, landscaping approvals, fence paint disputes. But one binder stood out. Resident behavior reports. Internal use? Only he flipped it open and felt his stomach drop. Each resident in the neighborhood had a profile, some marked in red, others with surveillance dates. Lucas's name appeared, twice with a box checked, escalated risk, but 2 names below his made him stop cold. Dana Voss, informant, McCall Duke WATCH, LIST. Lucas stared at the sheriff's name. Handwritten recent. So whoever had taken the folder, they were still watching. Back at home, Lucas decided to test something. He printed 3 fake documents, lookalikes of Dana's folder, filled with useless HOA stats and made-up memos, and placed them in different locations across the house. One in his bedroom, one under the floorboard, one inside a decoy guitar case. Then he left. He parked at the gas station a block away, and waited nothing for the first hour. Then, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. 10 minutes later, the lights flicked on in his side yard. Bingo, he returned. Home just before midnight with McCall's deputy trailing close behind, the fake file under the floorboard. Gone. The others untouched. Lucas smiled for the first time in days. Whoever they are, they think I've still got something they missed. The deputy nodded. Let 'em think it. We're watching now. The twist came the next morning, delivered in an envelope tucked into Lucas's mailbox. No stamp, no name. Inside, a printed photo of Dana sitting in a windowless room, pale eyes closed, head resting on her hand. Beneath it, a typed message. Tell the sheriff to back off, or she stays gone. Lucas stared at the photo, then looked up the street. The SUV was gone, but somewhere nearby, someone was still holding the strings. Lucas never considered himself reckless, but as he sat behind the wheel of his pickup at 4:43 a.m., engine idling, eyes locked on the black SUV 2 blocks ahead, he knew one thing. Waiting wasn't an option anymore. Dana was alive. That photo proved it, and whoever delivered it had made one crucial mistake. They left a fingerprint. Not on the photo, not on the envelope, but on the mailbox itself. A smudge, faint but recent, with part of a thumb whorl visible. Sheriff McCall had dusted it, filed it, but processing took time, and Lucas wasn't waiting on paperwork. The SUV rolled out just before sunrise. No rush, no urgency. Like it didn't have anything to hide. Lucas followed from 3 car lengths back, cutting through sleepy neighborhoods, past closed gas stations and shuttered hardware stores, until it veered off the main road and turned toward the industrial district on the edge of town. That's when Lucas's pulse changed. They weren't going home, they were going underground. The vehicle pulled into a fenced lot behind a warehouse complex, one Lucas recognized from years ago when it used to process used office furniture. Now the sign read Redwood Storage and Supply. The gate slid closed behind it. Lucas parked 2 blocks down and approached on foot. The side of the building was weathered, covered in gray paneling, no obvious cameras, but one unit. Unit 12 had a new lock, fresh wiring, and a faint humming sound behind the metal. Lucas jotted the number in his phone and stepped back. He didn't need to break in, he just needed someone who could. 3 hours later, Lucas sat in Sheriff McCall's office, laying it all out. The SUV's route, the unit number, the name on the gate lease, RDS Holdings LLC, registered just 6 months earlier. McCall nodded, chewing the inside of his cheek. That's a shell, he said, used to rent privately without tying anyone's name. We've been seeing more of them lately. You're saying she's in there? I don't know, but I am saying that SUV was used in my break-in, and someone inside that unit knows where Dana is. McCall stood, grabbed his jacket, and turned to his deputy. Get a warrant, quietly, and bring the U.S. Marshal on call. At 7:17 p.m., enforcement moved. They waited for dusk, then circled the building from 3 angles. Lucas wasn't allowed near the perimeter, but he watched from a rooftop nearby, hidden behind a rusted vent cover. Phone pressed to his chest, adrenaline chewing through his comm. Then, lights cut, power went dark, and 4 figures breached the side door of Unit 12. Inside, muffled shouting, then silence. Then a flashlight beam, and at last, Dana. She was seated in a folding chair, hands zip-tied, pale but alive. Her eyes met the flashlight and didn't flinch. She whispered something. The nearest agent cut her ties. Sheriff McCall walked her out himself. Lucas climbed down from the rooftop and ran to meet them halfway. Dana blinked as he approached, then gave a slow nod. They kept asking what I gave you, she said. I didn't say anything, Lucas exhaled. You don't need to. They just gave me everything I needed. The twist came back at the station when McCall pulled Lucas aside. You were right about the smudge, he said. We lifted a print. Came back to someone who's been ghosting us for years. Lucas raised a brow. Who? Guy named Marcus Lang, Karen's old boyfriend, disgraced former HOA contractor, barred from board work after embezzlement. Lucas's jaw tensed. So she brought him back in, quietly, through shell companies. He set up the surveillance network, and probably lit the match. Lucas looked at Dana. Did you ever see him? She hesitated. He wore a mask the whole time, but he smelled like sawdust and burnt wire. Lucas nodded, heart still pounding. He wasn't dealing with just HOA tyranny anymore. He was up against someone who knew the rules and how to bury them. Karen had already been charged. Tony was cooperating, and Dana was recovering at a safe location under McCall's watch. But Marcus Lang was still out there, a name from the past. The kind of contractor who used to fix HOA lighting systems, and ended up stealing budget money before vanishing from public view. Most folks thought he'd skipped town, but he hadn't gone far. Karen had kept him close, out of sight, operating quietly under new names. And now he was at the center of everything. The surveillance, the fire, the threats. Lucas had one goal left. Find him and make sure he answered for what was done. Sheriff McCall called early. The next morning we found a second unit under Karen's name, he said, listed as a personal storage locker. It was tucked inside the same complex where we found Dana. Lucas was already grabbing his keys. An hour later, they stood in front of a dull red door marked Unit 19, Holiday Decor. McCall's deputy cut the lock. Inside were bins labeled winter lights, Easter wreaths, and yard games. But beneath the seasonal junk, a large tarp covered what looked like a fold-out table. They pulled it back, and there it was. A massive blueprint. Lucas leaned closer. It wasn't just blueprints of the neighborhood. It was a detailed map of his house. Each room was labeled, measurements exact, electrical routes highlighted, Cameras drawn out in red ink. One note scribbled beside the guitar room, read, "Accelerant concentrate under shelf. Entry from east fence line. Avoid visible cams." Lucas's stomach turned. This was premeditated down to the inch. McCall nodded. They were never improvising. This was surgical. But what disturbed Lucas more was what lay beside the blueprint. A journal. A belonged to Marcus Lang. Each entry read like a technician's log. Cold, clinical pages outlined experiments in wire jamming, disabling Wi-Fi feeds, creating entry, points through smart home vulnerabilities. But one entry, written in a shakier hand, stood out. She promised me immunity if I finished the job. Told me he'd back off if I made it look like an accident. But that man doesn't back off. He rebuilds. I should have burned the backups when I had the chance. Lucas stepped back, heart beating hard in his chest. They thought he'd stop after the fire. They never planned for someone like him to dig. Later that night, Lucas met Dana at the sheriff's office. She looked stronger now, but her eyes still carried weight. He handed her the journal and the photo of the house blueprint. She stared in silence, then whispered, "There's one more place." Lucas tilted his head. Karen had an old trailer on the edge of town, Dana said. Used to use it for HOA tools and files before the clubhouse was remodeled. She once joked about how no one would look for anything there. McCall was already dialing the deputy. Within an hour, they were outside the rusted trailer near an abandoned utility lot, padlocked, overgrown, barely touched. Inside, they found rows of black crates and one old laptop with a screen still warm. Lucas scrolled through the files. Labeled folders filled the desktop. Compliance reports, camera logs, resident audio files. He clicked one. Tony's voice. She said to let the flames eat everything except the pic. That's what he'd noticed first. Lucas's throat tightened. He clicked another. Karen, if Lang talks, we burn the backups. All of it. They'd said it out loud and he had it now. Every file, every log, every word. But the twist. McCall walked back in with a stunned look on his face. We got a ping. Lucas looked up. From where? Lang just used his burner phone. He's 5 miles from here, hiding out behind the old water treatment plant. Lucas stood fast. McCall grabbed his jacket. Let's finish this. Marcus Lang had always operated behind the scenes. No paper trails, no public outbursts, and certainly no neighbors who remembered his face. He preferred to stay just out of view, the kind of man who made fires look like accidents and surveillance feel like coincidence. But now, thanks to his burner phone ping, the shadows weren't enough. Sheriff McCall, 2 deputies, and Lucas closed in on the old water treatment plant just past the redwood. Industrial stretch, an overgrown building surrounded by scrub brush and forgotten utility trucks. Lucas didn't speak during the drive. He didn't have to. He'd spent months being watched, lied to, robbed of his peace and the legacy his father left behind. And the man responsible was now holed up in a concrete tomb at the edge of town. They approached in silence. Deputies took the east and west ends. Lucas and McCall moved through the front, stepping over cracked pavement and rusted pipes. A soft humming came from within, a generator, barely functioning. Inside, the space was cluttered with cables, monitors, and crates. A makeshift bed was pressed against the wall, and crouched behind a tipped filing cabinet was Marcus Lang, mid-40s, scruffy, pale, his face lit by the screen of a laptop still running surveillance software. When he saw Lucas, he flinched, but didn't run. Didn't think you'd actually find me, Marcus said quietly. Lucas didn't blink. You left fingerprints, and you left her behind. Marcus stood slowly. His hands were shaking. You don't get it, he muttered. Karen promised this was about control, not destruction. But once she got power, it turned. McCall moved in from the left, hand resting near his holster. You torched a man's legacy. Lang, you kidnapped a witness. You tampered with public systems. Marcus looked around the dark room. I kept records, just in case she turned on me. Lucas took a step forward. Then, hand them over. Marcus stared at him, and something shifted in his eyes. You're not angry? He asked. Lucas's voice was steady. I'm here. 2 hours later, they were back at the station. Marcus had surrendered the final hard drive, one containing weeks of footage, full voice memos between Karen, Tony, and himself, and receipts linking Karen to unreported HOA purchases through Lang's front company. It was the final nail. Within days, Karen was formally indicted on federal charges: conspiracy, unauthorized surveillance, property damage, coercion, and obstruction. Tony's cooperation earned him leniency, though he lost his home and future in public service. Lang, he accepted a plea in exchange for complete disclosure. Dana was granted whistleblower protection and quietly moved to another county. And Lucas, the insurance check had already come, but no dollar figure could replace the emotional value of what he'd lost. Still, he rebuilt. Not out of revenge, but as a reminder. The new studio wasn't hidden away like before. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, fireproof walls, and one framed pic, slightly melted, set beneath glass with a plaque that read, "Survived," and played louder. He'd even started teaching guitar again, opening the doors to students, veterans, and kids who'd never held a fretboard before. What started in fire became something stronger, something heard, but one final twist waited 3 months after Karen's sentencing. Lucas received an envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, an old Polaroid of Karen at a barbecue. Behind her, in the blurred background, stood Marcus, in another face, unfamiliar. On the back, written in pen, "Not everyone's been caught." Lucas looked out the window toward Juniper Ridge Lane and smiled, just a little. "Let them come," he whispered. He wasn't the quiet one anymore. Narrator closing call to action. Lucas lost something priceless, but he found his voice. And in exposing the truth, he reminded a whole town that silence only helps the powerful. If you've stuck with this journey from the first chord to the last fire, thank you. And if someone ever tells you to quiet down for the sake of control, remember Lucas Grant, because some people don't just rebuild, they come back louder.